do, though, is we're going to talk about the pop horn voicings. Okay? So it says here, for number 1, it says, use the notes provided to create a pop horn voicing for each chord. Now, it's up there in the top, but I'll just kind of quickly put some of our reminders. So the pop horn voicings say that the top should be the root, aka octave, or the 5th of the chord. Okay, so that's going to be the 7 plane or 9 plane for the root, right? Or the 5th. Okay, the next one down is going to be the 3rd of the chord. Okay, and the one below that for a 3-note voicing is going to be the 7th. Okay, so that's the voicing technique from top to bottom of the 3-note voicing. So if we look at this first chord here, we can see that it's a B flat 7. It's a triad, and there's the notes, B flat, D, and F. So there are 2 correct answers for this voicing, and we'll do both of them. What note has to be on the top of our voicing? We have 2 options. That's one of them, right? The root, B flat. What's the other right answer? F, because it's the 5th. That's terrible F. There we go. All right. What would be in the 3rd of the voicing? Or the, sorry, wow. Let me ask that question again. What would be the next voice down? The 3rd, right? And in this case, when the root is on the top, this is a perfect voicing. Because you get a nice 6th interval between here, which is a really great sound. And then we're missing, we have 1 extra note here. We put the root here, we put the 3rd here. What note have we not talked about yet? Not really, because is there a 7th in this chord? There's not a no, there's not a excuse me, there's not a 7th, and we've already done D, right? D is the 3rd, it's right here. So what note haven't we used up? We have a B flat, a D, and an F. Yeah. The F, right? So typically speaking, as kind of a side rule here, I'm going to call this one number 4 for fun, is the bottom note, it could be a leftover. Okay? We have an F left. Well, if we've already used up the root and we've already used up the 3rd, we only have 1 note left, so it's going to be the 5th, right? Like, well, we have no other option. We got to use that note up, so let's use it up. So, bam, we'll go ahead and put an F on the bottom. And F in treble clef just happens to be 3 ledger lines, like that. Okay, so that's one answer to the question, and that would be a correct answer. One way you know that it's a pop horn voicing is the notes should be spread. Okay, so I'll put that here as a reminder when you watch the video. Pop voicings are spread. Okay, they're really not supposed to be right next to each other. Although this wouldn't sound horrible to play B flat D F, that's not really a great pop horn voicing because your trombone player would struggle to play one of these 2 notes, and your tenor player would be playing one of the highest pitches on their instrument. So that's not a great way of doing the voicing. Does that make sense? So now, when we look at the next voicing type, we actually kind of have a 50-50 option here, and I'll kind of discuss why. And it sort of talks about this up there in your book. But if we said that we could have the root or the 5th on the top, we put the 5th on the top. If we put the 3rd as the next note down, we'd have two options, right? We'd have this note right here, or we'd have that one down there. Why would this be a problematic voicing? Yeah, it's huge. It's greater than an octave. It's greater than an octave by a lot. It's a really big interval. And there's a rule in voicings that any two notes should not be more than an octave apart. So you could have two notes that are like an octave apart, or two notes that are a sixth or a seventh apart, but like an octave plus a fifth is a really big voicing. And you can hear, if I play it on the piano, it sounds really hollow. So here's the F, and here would be that low D. Versus there's the D right next to it. So if I didn't want to have this gigantic spread, what could I do to fix the problem? Yeah, you could drop the fifth down, and that would put the D and the F close together. But there's another thing. I think you were maybe trying to say this, but it's not a drop. Instead of having the second voice down in this case be the third, what would, Well, we could do that, but what would happen if we swapped the second and the third note? What would happen if I put the B flat here in the middle? So F, B flat, and D. See how it makes for a really nice spread? So rule 5 over here is to avoid big spread, flip bottom notes. So if I flip the two bottom notes, then all of a sudden it puts the voicing back in a reasonable register. I could have also potentially have changed my top note, right? That would be a solution, but because I only have two options for a top note, it's sort of problematic. And so what you're going to find in all seriousness when you do this assignment, there's always going to be two answers. There's going to be root on the top, which typically means you're going to get third and then 5, or you're going to get 5 on the top, which oftentimes necessitates this flipping thing where I get that inverted voicing like that. Does that make sense? Now this one here, or this one here that has a 7th in it, remember the top note needs to be the root of the 5th. So if this F7, this is the 7, this is the 5th, and this is the 3rd, what note has to stay on top? So this chord here, it's an F7. The 3 notes given us are a 3rd, a 5th, and a 7th. Because the top note has to be the root of the 5th, what note has to be on the top of this voicing? The 5th. So that means that if the 5th is on the top, then I can either do 3rd next, which would be that, followed by 7. Or I could invert the bottom 2, and I could get C, E flat, and A. But C has to be on the top because of rule 1. Of this G minor 7, you have a B flat, an F, and a G. What note has to be on top? So the top note has to be the root of the 5th. Of a G minor 7 chord, we have a B flat, an F, and a G. What note has to be on top? So G, yeah, because is there a 5th in that chord? No, so, well, it can't be the 5th then, so it has to be the root, which is G. So the top notes of these pop horn voicings are really straightforward.
Really well tuned pattern.
Yeah, because once you do that, the other two notes kind of fall into place. Does that make sense?
So it's either always the root or the 5th.
Yep. And huh? Correct. Because these voicings, much like block voicings, are what we call top down. It's hard to pick the bottom note of a pop horn voicing because it really is depending on what the top note is, right? So until you assign the top note, you really won't know what the bottom note is. 5-plane, 9-plane voicings, however, are bottom-up voicings because we choose the bottom note. I'm going to put the third on the bottom, and then that dictates everything above it. Does that make sense? So there's top-down and there's bottom-up voicings. And in this case, we're doing top-down voicings. Okay, now number 2 here says create 3-note 5th on the top voicings. So every single one of these chords is going to share a couple things in common. One, you only need 3 notes. And the 5-plane is on top. Okay? Oops. P. So in a C13 chord, what's in the 5-plane? The 13. So this chord is going to have an A on the top because that's the 13, which is the 5-plane. Does that make sense? What's in the 5-plane of an A9 chord? You can just tell me the number if you don't know that. In the 5-plane. The 5, yeah! So here's a stupid thing. Does this chord say anything about an 11 or a 13? So what does it have to be in the 5-plane? The 5th. I don't mean to sound flippant, but that is literally going to be the answer. This one's 13 because it says 13. All the rest of these, do they say anything about an 11 or a 13? So guess what? They all have a 5 on top. Boom. Now, let me ask a really, really weird and pointed question. This is an A9 chord. We know that the top note of our voicing has to be the root or the 5th. We know that the next voicing down should probably be the 5th, and the one below that should be the 7th. Will anyone be playing the 9th of this chord? No, no one will be playing the 9th, which is fine because these are very strict voicing types. And so some voicings or some voices get left by the wayside because guess what? You're not allowed to just willy-nilly da-da-da. Top note, root, or 5th. The 3rd and the 7th are the next voices down. And whatever note is left over could be the bottom voice. And to avoid big spreads, we can flip the notes. So in this case, because all of these, according to the directions, all of them are 5th on the top voicings, that means the 5-plane is covered by the top voice, the 3rd plane is covered, and the 7-plane is covered. There's no one left to play the 9-plane. So that note is just lost. That's fine. So does that make sense? So don't freak out over that. You do exactly what it says. It's in a way, it's not there to trick you, but it's there to make you go, oh yeah, okay. By the same token, the next ones say these need to be root on the top voicings. The first chord's a B13. The top note needs to be the 9-plane, the root. Then you need the 7th and the 3rd below it. Is anyone playing the 13? Nope, right, because we don't have enough people. There's not an extra player available, and so the 13 is just left off because we have to have somebody playing the 9-plane, which in this case is the root, and the 3rd and the 7th. The 13 is just not there, which is fine. Again, doesn't matter. Now, okay, yeah, that's that. All right, now number 4 says create a 4-note horn voicing. Now, on the 4-note voicings, these are pretty easy. Is the 4-note voicings, oops, 4-note. All the rules above plus the root on the bottom. So basically, all you're doing is this. There's the 3-note horn voicing, and then you have the bari player on the bottom. Because if you do this right and you put the root on the bottom, you're pretty much good. So it's not a real big stretch when you do the 4-note horn voicings.
Can everybody see everybody's notes? And they just know based on their instrument which note to play?
No, actually, typically speaking, you would not do that. You just give me my one note.
That's a lot of like when you're watching orchestras, they're literally looking at.
Which is why I'm so particular about this stuff, because if you write a piece and you want a bunch of horn players or string players or whatever to play it, you have to write the part correctly, because I don't know what the trumpet player has. I have my note. You gave me a note to play, and I will play it accurately and in tune, but you had to decide if it was the right note or not. And I'll be honest with you, it's really hard to pick a note out of a grouping like that. So it actually makes it harder to read the music if you give me 5 notes. Okay, does this assignment make sense to everybody? Questions over any of that?
For two, like when we're, or just like any of them when we're doing we're changing the voicings, is it just the voicing that we're doing, like, or we're not doing anything with like the bass clef?
The bass clef in this case is only the roots.
Right.
So in essence, no, there's really nothing to put, except for on number 4, you need to put those roots on the bottom. So that would be in the bass clef.